When a stranger appears without words, the truth hides in shadows. Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. Drop a comment with your location. I can't wait to see where everyone is listening from today. It had been raining since late afternoon, the sort of fine, steady rain that settles into the city like a habit. Commissaire Lucien Lemaire sat by the kitchen window, where the sill was always damp to the touch, even on clear days. Madame Lemaire was knitting by the stove. She kept her wool basket on a chair and never on the floor, superstitions collected from her mother, and stubborn as the knot in her brow when the yarn snagged. The radio behind the glass jar of wooden spoons muttered a waltz. Now and then, a car snarled past on the boulevard, and the sound faded into a thin hiss. Lemaire's coat hung on the peg near the door, still carrying the smell of wet wool from the morning. He watched a bead of water travel the pane, lengthen and fall, leaving a faint track like a telegram written in a hurry. He had no intention of going back out, not even to the corner cafe where the waiter would, without asking, put a small beer in front of him, and then pretend not to notice how long it took him to drink it. He had eaten too much bread at dinner, and the stew had been heavier than the weather warranted. "It will rain all night," Madame Lemaire observed without looking up. "It will," he said. That might have been all, a quietly closed day, the little domestic rituals folded and put away with the dishes. But the telephone rang. In that room it felt like an intruder. You could almost see it, jangling in from the corridor with its hat skewed and its umbrella dripping, not sure if it was welcome. Lemaire lifted the receiver. He never rushed to it. He didn't say his name. At once, the voice he expected, official, clipped from the central desk, did not come. What came instead was a hesitating breath and the small sound of someone swallowing the end of a word. "Commissaire?" a man whispered. "Is that the commissaire? I beg your pardon for the hour." "You have it," Lemaire said. "Who speaks?" "Aubin. Hôtel des Carmes, Rue Truden, the concierge. Perhaps you do not remember me." He did, vaguely, but for reasons that had nothing to do with the man himself. The iron smell of him when he leaned on the counter, the way he folded his hands before speaking as if for grace, the small glass of gentian on a saucer he never touched. Lemaire had been at the hotel a week ago for a petty theft that turned out to be a quarrel between a chambermaid and the night porter. He had left his card because that was what one did, to reassure people who needed reassuring. "I remember, Monsieur Aubin." There was a pause, as if Aubin had wanted the courtesy of being remembered before he said anything that might make a fool of him. "It is a small thing, maybe nothing," Aubin said, lowering his voice. "A man, a client, room 14 on the first landing. He came 3 days ago without luggage. He paid in cash each morning for the night before. He didn't speak, not once. We asked nothing. You know how it is. But this evening, after the rain started, there was a smell in the corridor. Like gas, but not strong. We knocked, no answer. I opened with the passkey. He is," another pause, "sitting on the chair very straight. The windows open to the courtyard. His shoes are dry." Madame Lemaire had stopped knitting. He could feel her looking at the back of his head, the way a doctor examines a stethoscope before putting it on your chest. "Have you called the doctor?" Lemaire asked. "Yes, he is here, a little man with a mustache. He says the heart, probably. He has signed something. He is in a hurry for another call. There is no need for police, he says." Aubin made a sound that might have been a laugh. "But I kept thinking, how can a man who doesn't speak have so much to say with his face when he is dead? Forgive me. I thought of your card." Lemaire turned the receiver so the cord would not twist itself into a knot. "I am not on duty tonight." "I know. Forgive me," Aubin repeated, the words falling like coins returned. "It is only that the shoes are very dry." He promised nothing and hung up. The house regained its hush, which was not silence but a kind of presence, the radio, the ticking of the clock, the rain that you heard more in the drain-pipe than on the window. Madame Le Maire had not resumed her knitting. Who was it, she asked. A concierge. She waited the way she did when she wanted him to go on and knew he might not. He put on his coat. He didn't look for his umbrella. He preferred the rain tonight, a feeling like a hand on his shoulder. It's late, she said, but not reproachfully. I won't be long. The Hôtel des Carmes was a 10-minute walk if you cut down the side streets where the gutters were slick. The city was folded into itself. People walked tucked into their collars, the oiled shine of their hats glistening under street lamps. Delivery vans stood outside a bakery, steaming. The driver slept with his head against the wheel. At the corner, the cafe had its lights high, as if to pretend the night was still early. Le Maire could get a good beer there, though he wouldn't. He paused under the awning long enough to watch a woman lift her hem to step over a puddle. Her ankles were bare and narrow. He found himself thinking that no one ever knows all the small ways in which people protect themselves. Rue Trudaine runs a little uphill there, not enough to make you tire, only enough to make you feel the rain differently on your face as you lift it. The hotel had a frosted glass door with the paint wearing off the edges of the letters. Inside it smelled of cabbage and cheap soap, and the carpet, red once, had faded where the sun had touched it in the mornings. Aubin was behind the desk, shorter than Le Maire remembered, with that posture some concierges have, as if trying not to bring their own body into the conversation. He nodded and stepped out from behind, rubbing his hands together. "I know it is not your affair," he murmured. "Only there is something. I am a foolish man, perhaps." He had a colourless face and eyes that changed nothing when they moved. They climbed the stairs together. At the first landing, Aubin paused to pull out a large brass key hung with a wooden tag that said 14. The corridor felt muffled, though the window at the far end stood open to a square of night. The smell was faint and then not at all, as if someone had shut their mouth upon it. A doctor with a small moustache and a leather bag stood in the doorway, already pulling on one glove. "Ah," he said, not to anyone in particular. "You are. From the police it is nothing. Hart, a man of about 50, I would say, happens. He was sitting, which is curious but not unheard of. I have signed. I am called to Saint-Georges. The living wait less patiently than the dead." He smiled at his own remark, not unkindly. "Did he have papers?" Le Maire asked. "One card, with a name. It could be his, could be the man who sold. Him the card." The doctor's moustache twitched. "No address, no family, no one ever comes to a room like that trailing relatives. You will take care of it." He tipped his hat. "Monsieur Aubin, good night." They stepped aside to let him pass. His footsteps went down the stairs with a little click. The door opened and closed. The corridor felt exactly the same. Aubin looked at Le Maire as if to say he hadn't meant to lose his head. He put the key in the lock and opened the door as carefully as if someone was sleeping. The room was small, the way rooms are that don't plan for anyone to stay. A narrow bed with a grey blanket, a chair, a wobbly table with a wash-basin on it, a gas ring that had been turned off. The window over the courtyard was open, and the sound of rain there was different from the rain in the street, more private, the way things sound behind other people's shutters. The man sat straight in the chair beside the table, his hands on his thighs as if waiting. He wore a brown suit too big for him, and a tie that had been tied carefully twice. His hair was greying evenly, as if someone had dusted it. His face held nothing theatrical. Death had tucked in any loose corners. That was the first impression. "No fuss, he never spoke," Aubin said quietly, and then, as if that required justification, "He would raise a finger like that if you asked, 'Do you want your key?'" He nodded, or he didn't. He paid in exact coins. Even in the morning, when one says good day, he did not return the words. He wasn't rude. He had no voice, that is all. Le Maire stepped a little closer, not too close. He looked at the shoes. They were black and well polished, more carefully than a man does for himself. He put a finger on the leather. Even with The rain leaking in from the courtyard. The shoes were dry. They had been wiped. Perhaps there had been mud, and someone couldn't bear the sight of it and took a cloth to it. Perhaps the man had then sat down and died with clean shoes. He examined the window. The sill had a few small circles where drops had stood and then dried. On the table there was a glass with a thumbprint near the rim, the print white in the dimness. He could see where someone had wiped it and missed that part. In the wash basin lay a cigarette butt. It had not burned down. Someone had stubbed it, out early, as if embarrassed by smoking at all. There was a worn leather wallet on the table, open. In it a single card with a name printed in neat letters, René Vachon. No address, no photograph. Beneath it, folded once, a receipt for the purchase of a pair of shoes from a shop on Boulevard de Magenta, dated 2 days ago. Size 42. "Who bought him shoes?" Lemaire asked, not expecting an answer. Aubin made a small, helpless gesture with his open hand. Perhaps he did. Perhaps. Lemaire always found there was more than enough to notice before one began to think. A corner of the blanket had been folded over, once, and no further, the way a person does who sits down for a moment and then decides to stand. On the chair, the man's jacket had a smear on the sleeve, something light as if he had leaned against chalk. He put his hand on the chair back for a moment, only to feel the grain of the wood. Aubin watched him as if he were a priest about to confess someone on behalf of the dead. "Did he ever get a visitor?" Lemaire asked. "No one." "Except," Aubin hesitated. "This afternoon, a woman stopped at the desk. She had a little dog that trembled and wouldn't be quiet. She asked if a man of medium height and ordinary face had taken a room here. I asked what kind of face was ordinary. She laughed, and then she said, 'Never mind,' and went away. The dog made a noise like a bird. She was about 40, maybe more, with her hair done too carefully. Forgive me. It is only that people who are alone do their hair carefully. They must do something with their hands." Lemaire said nothing. Rain spattered on the sill. He heard a faint voice from another room, someone telling a child to go to sleep, and then the quiet again that a hotel imposes like good manners. He looked once more at the dead man's face, at the mouth which in life had not had much to do, and he wondered about the last words that had formed there and been swallowed. "All right," he said, almost to himself. He left the room as one leaves any small room by habit, taking care with the door so as not to make a noise. On the landing, he waited for a moment without a reason. Aubin, uncertain whether to speak, busied himself aligning the key on the wooden tag. Lemaire took his hat in his hand to shake off the rain and then set it back on his head, though he was indoors. "The shoes," Aubin murmured, as if continuing a different conversation. "Yes," Lemaire said. "The shoes." He did not try to explain to himself why those shoes, clean on a dirty night, were like a voice raised in a room where everyone had been silent. He would come again in the morning. He would speak to the shop on Boulevard de Magenta, and perhaps to the woman with the careful hair if he could find her, and perhaps he would sit at a table in the café at the corner where someone would bring him a beer and pretend not to notice he let it warm. He went down the stairs slowly. On the ground floor by the glass door, he paused and looked out at the street. The rain had not changed its mind. He had the feeling, not of being called to a case, but of being led gently somewhere he would not have gone if left to himself. He buttoned his coat and stepped into the night. He walked home with the rain on his hat brim and the curious lightness that comes when one has made no decision and yet has decided. Madame Lemaire had left the lamp on the sideboard. She rose to turn it down as he came in. She did not ask. He undressed slowly, as one does when listening for a sound that is not there, and lay awake a long time. When sleep came, it was not deep, only a soft place where the shoes appeared now and then as if they had wandered in by mistake and were embarrassed to be seen. He went out before the street was properly awake. The gutters still ran. The bread, van that had slept outside the bakery, had gone, leaving a square of dryness under its tires. At the cafe near the hotel, the waiter wiped the marble tables with a cloth that made more water than it removed. He set a small coffee down and pretended not to look at Lemaire's face. The hotel's door was propped open with a brass ashtray. Aubin stood talking to the woman who did the rooms, a stout little person with the quick, practical movements of someone who never stopped being busy even when nothing needed doing. When he saw Lemaire, Aubin came around the desk as if to lessen the distance. "They came at dawn," he said softly. "It is better sometimes when it is early. The other guests do not know that they know." He glanced at the stairs. "The room is as it was." "May I?" Lemaire asked no one in particular. Aubin made a small gesture with his hand, the gesture of a man offering a chair and hoping it won't be refused. The corridor had cooled in the night. The window was still open to the dull light of the courtyard, where a cat sat on a ledge with its paws tucked under. The room's smell had changed. The rain had diluted it to something almost agreeable, soap and old wood. The chair waited. The bed's corner was folded back as before, the blanket flattened by absence. In daylight the shoes shone too much. He ran a forefinger lightly along the edge of the sole. It came back clean. Under the bed, close to the skirting where a broom would not reach unless someone insisted, he saw a piece of cardboard. He knelt because he disliked doing things halfway. It was the lid of a shoebox, with the printed name of a shop in sober letters. Belloin Chaussures, Boulevard de Magenta. A corner was greasy where someone had set a cup down, perhaps in a life before this room, perhaps not. He slid it back, into place, and stood. The dead man hadn't been of the kind who left litter about, unless it had been useful to him in some small way. The woman from the rooms had been waiting in the doorway without announcing herself. "He never let me in," she said in the tone of someone offering an apology, and a fact at once. The 2 days he put the key on the counter and took it back without a word. "Yesterday morning I saw him in the corridor. He went past with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing. If you had asked me then where he would go, I would have said nowhere." "And the shoes?" Lemaire asked. "I don't touch men's shoes. It is a rule of mine. They get offended if you shine them, and if you don't, they say we do nothing." She had a good face, open, a little amused at the futility of pleasing everyone. He went down with the sense that the stairwell understood more about comings and goings than anyone standing in it. Aubin, straightening papers that did not need straightening, ventured, "The woman with the dog, she has not come back." He said it as if offering to mend something that had not exactly broken. Lemaire nodded. On Boulevard de Magenta, the pavement was already crowded in that muddled way of the morning when everyone believes himself late. Belloin's windows were modest, with the plain confidence of good leather. Inside, the smell was warm and faintly sweet. Shoes stood in pairs as if conversing quietly. A man with close-cropped hair and a measuring tape round his neck looked up and dipped his head. He was washing the glass of a display case with vinegar and newspaper. "Yes?" Lemaire put the folded receipt on the counter. He had not taken it, only copied the name, but he let his hand rest as if paper lay there. 2 days ago, a man about 50, ordinary in the way that is harder to describe than the unusual, size 42. The man did not ask who Lemaire was. He took his time thinking, as those do who do not like to be wrong. "I remember him not because of his face, because he did not speak." He pointed to his feet and then to a pair near the door. He tried them, stood, took a step as if the floor might be different in new shoes. He smiled without showing his teeth. He paid with notes. He kept the receipt. "He came alone?" "Yes." The man wiped the glass a last time and folded the newspaper. Later a woman came. She asked if a man had bought shoes here who did not speak. She had a little dog that trembled so much I thought it might jump out of its skin. She laughed when I said many men do not speak in a shoe shop. Then she said, "This one more than most," and went away. He paused. She had her hair done in waves, not too modern. She wore gloves when no one does anymore. She smelled of something violette. I noticed things like that. Was he wearing his old shoes when he came? Lemaire asked. He left. Them. I offered to keep them for repairs. He shook his head. They are in the back. We do not throw away good leather without thinking. The man lifted a flap and disappeared behind a curtain. In the shop's small hush, the clock on the wall made a faint, conscientious noise. Lemaire rested his hands on the counter as if to warm them. The old shoes came out wrapped in brown paper. The paper had the soft, tired look of many packages used twice. The leather was decent, cracked along the bend, a split beginning at the toe of the right. The heels were worn more on the outside edge, the way of a man who places his foot like a question. Inside, someone had mended the lining with grey thread that did not match. The stitching was patient but not skillful. "Do you want them?" the man asked, with the practicality of one who dislikes throwing a life away in small pieces. "I'll take them for a day," Lemaire said. He slid a coin across that meant nothing official but covered the habit of buying one's own doubts. On the pavement again, the package under his arm was light and heavier than it should have been. He stood a moment in the flow of people and thought about a woman with careful hair who collected the traces of a man who left none, and about a pair of shoes that had carried someone as far as they could and had been told, politely, that their services were no longer required. He did not go far. The parcel under his arm felt like a reminder that would keep tapping until he answered. He turned back to Rue Trudaine and the hotel with the letters fading on the glass. Aubin looked up with the pained relief of a man who hopes someone else will take on what he has already taken on, more than he meant to. "The register," Lemaire said gently. She shook her head, a movement not of refusal, more of weariness. "There is a cafe opposite where I take coffee when the fumes here are too much. People speak. They believe I keep their words as I keep their hair, fixed. It is not true. Words fall, but some stay." He watched her and said nothing. The humming filled the need for conversation. A drop from the kettle on the hot plate clicked when it met the ring. She looked at his face and found in it no impatience. "I went to the desk. I asked the question you already know I asked. I left. In the street I stood a moment. It had begun to rain in earnest. I came back to ask if perhaps I could send up a note. Then the back door banged. Your man was away. I stayed where I was. I am not a thief in a corridor. You must not think that. He did not. He had the sense of someone who had done a thing she would not have imagined herself doing, and was trying to set it to rights by minding the borders. "The rag?" he said, as if to himself. Her mouth softened before it spoke. "If a man is going to a meeting that matters, it is not kind to let him arrive with mud at the edge of his soul," she said. "One can do that much without being invited." There was a mark where the leather meets the welt. I saw it when he came 2 days before to ask if I knew of a decent place not too dear. She glanced up quickly to catch what that admission did. "He did speak, you see. So you know it was not that he was mute. He spoke once to me. I told him the Calms is decent enough if you're not proud." She had her hands in her lap now. The dog had settled. "What did he say?" "Thank you," she said, almost in a whisper. And then, irritated with herself, louder, "It is nothing." I wiped his shoe. I threw the rag in the corridor without thinking, and then I thought too much. I'm a foolish woman. "You smelled of violette," he said. She looked at him with amusement back on her face. "And you of rain." She turned, her head a little. "You make a story out of what is only a courtesy. Did you see him last night?" he asked. "I did not go up," she repeated, but without heat. "I waited at the cafe 10 minutes. If he had come down, he would have seen me. He did not. I am not one to wait longer when there is work to be done. The waves do not set themselves. She gestured toward the humming machine. If you will write your address, I will come if you need me. Or you may come at the hour when there are no ladies. 2 is best. He took a card from his wallet and wrote the number that served for such calls. She watched the pen with an unembarrassed curiosity. As he slid the card toward her, she placed her glove over it before taking it, as if to keep his touch and hers from overlapping on the paper. He noticed the faint brown crescent at the thumb of the glove, a trace of wax caught in the stitching. Madame Valette, he said. The man's name was Vachon. René. Do you know it? She did not pretend not to. I know it now because you have said it, she replied. Before that, he was someone who placed his feet as if the ground might give. There are many of those. He inclined his head. A small breeze wrinkled the curtain at the back. The client under the dryer turned a page. The dog, assured that nothing dramatic was to happen, sighed as if relieved by boredom. In the street again, the light had changed from grey to the pale, indecisive colour that follows rain when it cannot be sure of itself. He stood a moment, where people passed close and did not brush him. In his pocket the flannel kept its smell. In his arm the old shoes from Boulogne were light as a thought one is not finished thinking. He looked up and down the boulevard without choosing, then turned toward the café where Madame Valette had not waited long to see the 10 minutes she had given away, and whether anyone there had noticed a man who came to sit and failed to arrive. The café had its door propped with a crate of oranges that had seen better voyages. Inside, the mirror behind the zinc made everyone look a little paler and a little more honest. The bell on the door gave a small, resigned clink. He took a table near the window, where the hotel sign reversed itself in the glass, and the hairdresser's curtain stirred when anyone passed. The waiter brought a coffee without being asked, and set it down with a care that said he knew how easy cups were to crack when the mornings had been long. He glanced at the parcel under Le Maire's arm as if it might be a tool or a pie. "You get us rain every time," he said, friendly without an invitation to talk. "I try to vary it," Le Maire said. He did not announce himself. He stirred the coffee and did not drink. People came in, shook themselves at the threshold as dogs do, took their places in a pattern they did not have to think about. He watched, and the café, which liked to be watched, settled into being itself. After a while the waiter came back to wipe what did not need wiping. "Last night," Le Maire said, so lightly the cloth did not pause. "A woman, little dog, she waited 10 minutes for someone who did not come." The waiter's face made a small movement that was amusement and pity together. "Madame Valette," he said. "The one with the violet smell, yes. She sits where you sit, but with her back to the door. She watches the hotel without seeming to. She takes a vermouth with water and cuts it until it is only a glass of almost nothing. She left before the pudding." "What time?" 8:15, he said without thinking, and only after, with a modest pride. "The radio gave the weather then. It said the rain would persist. It has the voice of a man who is glad to be right. And the man who was meant to come?" Le Maire turned the spoon, felt the handle warm against his thumb. The waiter spread his hand. "We have men," he said, and glanced toward the back, where, beyond a partition with a potted plant that had lost interest in living, a billiard table stood with its green faded like old grass. "There was one 2 nights ago. Brown suit, the sort from a shop that is honest but cannot advise." He sat under the clock. He placed his sleeve on the table edge, and then lifted it when he saw the chalk. He brushed it, but not well. He looked at Le Maire's sleeve, as if expecting to see the same mark appear by sympathy. He did not speak, not to me. He nodded, "Thank you." He made a little sign for the telephone. "Where is it?" "Behind the zinc." The waiter nodded toward the end of the bar. He dialed and listened. He did not put a coin in at once. He waited the way one waits for a lift, when one knows it is coming but cannot hear it yet. Then he hung up slowly, as if not to disturb anyone on the other end. Did he try again? Yesterday, before 6, the waiter said, looking past his shoulder as if memory lived behind the bottles. He did the same. He had a paper. He folded it small before he dialed. When he left the paper. I threw it away. He grimaced. Not for the paper, but for the missed chance to be useful. You remember the number? He shook his head. I remember the first 2 because I thought how foolish I am, forgetting even numbers I hear twice. I am not a telephone. 43, like the roo. After that the clicks ran together. He moved his lips when he listened. Some do, as if they could send words back that way. It did not help. Lemaire drank half the coffee. It was better now, a little cold. He stood, not to leave, only to go and lay his hand a moment on the edge of the billiard table. The felt had been brushed recently in one direction. The palm picked up a dusting that made a faint pale bloom on the dark of his coat. He brushed it, left a smudge that did not go altogether. The smear on the dead man's sleeve had been just such a stubbornness. Did he play? He asked. He stood, like a man who has forgotten a word and thinks it may be written on the felt, the waiter said. The others gave him space because he was polite about existing. Some people intrude without moving. He did not. He went when the lamps were lit. He left a 5-franc piece for a small coffee. I noticed because the coin had a notch in it, as if someone had tested it with a tooth. Anyone spoke to him? A man with a cap from the post office looked at him as one looks at a face one cannot place. That is all. The cap man comes at 7 and leaves at 7:20. He sits near the door so he can run if the supervisor passes. He wiped a clean rim again. Yesterday around 8 there was a woman with a red scarf who watched the hotel. Doran then decided she was watching herself and left. Not Madame Valette. Another who has learned to mind her business. Lemaire set down his cup. He felt the day deciding its next small step without consulting him. You have matches? He asked, because the box was there and because it was a thing one asked. The waiter slid a packet over. On the back someone had tried a pen and made a line that began dark and faded. He turned it, looked without really expecting, and saw nothing but the cafe's name in blue. He left the matches where they were. As he paid, the bell on the door clinked again. Her man in his 30s with the cap the waiter had described came in, glanced toward the clock, then at the tables, then at Lemaire. He had that habit some working men have of reading rooms to see where trouble will land. Lemaire did not stop him. Trouble was not for him to summon like a drink. On the pavement, the air had dried to a fragile clearness that would not last. He crossed to the hotel without priority and stood where the door's brass plate had been polished by years of thoughtful wrists. He did not go in. He looked up at door, the windows that gave nothing away. The number 43 clicked quietly in his head, and with it the shape of streets. Rue Trudaine had its own 43 before it crossed the boulevard, but telephone numbers had their own geographies. He could take the flannel, the violette on it, to the back door and see if the smell lay in the cracks of the wood where hands had been. He did not. He lit a cigarette that he would not finish because he did not often finish them, and watched the smoke turn from something to nothing. He went instead toward the public telephone at the corner where one makes calls one would rather say were made by chance. He took a coin from his pocket, then put it back. He would go to the exchange later. There were clerks who still enjoyed the romance of needles over maps. For now, the number 43 was enough to hold. On his way, he passed the ribbon shop. In its window were spools wound in colors too honest to be fashionable. A woman inside measured a length for a girl who would take it home and pretend it changed her life. He thought of the grey thread mending the old shoes and of someone who had done a neat thing with poor materials. He thought of the jackets, chalk, and the way a man places his hand on a table to steady himself. He turned back to the hotel at last. In the lobby, Orbin looked up, set his pencil down between two lines as if to keep his place in whatever life was being copied, and waited. Lemaire stood there without announcing what he wanted, and listened to the faint sound from some room or other of water running and being turned off, of someone deciding between going out in the weather or staying where they were. He had the feeling that one person, the right one, could settle the questions without being asked, and that he might have already met her, or him. He was not in a hurry. The day had time. Aubyn's pencil was still set between two lines when Lemaire crossed to a chair near the window and put the parcel on his knees. He did not make a ceremony of it. He eased the paper aside and took one of the old shoes in his hand. The leather had a way of yielding as if it recognized fingers. He bent it slightly. The crack at the toe opened and closed like a mouth that had nothing to say and was tired of being asked. He ran a thumb along the inside. The lining had been restitched with the same patient grey thread. The insole lifted a little at the heel, and there the leather had darkened with the marks of the women one never sees, the ones in factories who glue and press and send out other people's lives in pairs. He did not look round. He slipped a fingernail under the edge and coaxed. It came up grudgingly with that soft sound old glue makes when it lets itself be persuaded. Beneath, flat against the shoe bottom, a scrap of paper had set itself like a fish under a stone. He pinched it free. It was a cloakroom ticket, the kind printed in thick ink that smudges if it is damp. Consigne, Gare du Nord, 3 jours, number, stamped in a purple that had bled a little, 872. Someone had folded it twice and smoothed it again, as if undecided whether to trust it. Aubyn at the desk did not speak. It was one of his virtues. He watched Lemaire put the insole back in place, with the same care he'd taken to lift it. The paper went into the wallet with the matches and the card for Madame Valette. He wrapped the shoes again without hurry, as if putting a child to bed you did not wish to wake. "Do you mind," he said, "if the room stays as it is?" Aubyn nodded at once. "I have told Hélène to leave it a day." He hesitated. It is easier to keep a room unchanged than a story." The door opened and let in a slip of colder air with a man in a raincoat too light for the weather. He had a face that seemed not to agree with itself, the mouth resigned, the eyes always expecting, to be contradicted. He looked at Lemaire and made a tiny grimace that was almost a bow. "Commissaire," he said formally enough to make the word a comment. "Off duty, on duty, it's rain either way." He showed his own card to no one. "Borden from the brigade. Paper wants a signature that says no one will be surprised when he is buried." "The doctor was not surprised," Lemaire said. "The doctor signs everything," Borden replied without malice. He took out a form, set it on the marble, and wrote as if his fingers ached. "If you are here," he added, glancing up, "it is not nothing. That is my experience." He blew on the ink and waited for it to decide. "Let the room be," Lemaire said. "A day." Borden looked toward the stairs. "I'll pretend I didn't hear that," he said in a tone that meant he had. "And I will tell the office you said it, so they can say I should not have." He put the paper away and the corners of his mouth turned down further in what might have been a smile. "Will there be a file?" "If there is, it will be thin," Lemaire said. "Thin files are the ones the chiefs complain about," Borden murmured, and nodded as if he had settled something with himself. He went out again as if remembering he had left a pan on the stove at home. Lemaire stood another minute, not to think, only to let his mind stop arranging the facts, like pieces, on a small table and allow them to lie where they chose. Then he tucked the parcel under his arm and went out the way Borden had, into a day that was holding its breath between showers. The Gare du Nord takes a city and stretches it so that all its habits look small. The boards clicked. A porter went by with a truck piled with cases that had been paid for by men who told their wives they were not going far. In the consigne, the air was always a little cooler, the counter high, the grill a reminder that even umbrellas have their crimes. Behind, the grill a clerk with a cigarette that had gone out, kept it between his lips as a principle. His hair was smoothed with something that tried too hard. He took the ticket, glanced at it as if it might be one of those jokes people do to clerks, and walked away without asking a question. Le Maire watched his back, the way the jacket creased, between the shoulder blades. The parcel came back in the clerk's hand. A small valise, brown once and now the colour of coffee with too much milk. The handle had been mended with... There was that grey thread again, neat, a little too proud of its neatness. The clerk set it down on the metal shelf as one sets down anything one does not wish to be responsible for. Vous signez, he said, tapping a line where no pen lay. Le Maire took his own pen from his pocket and wrote a name there that was not his, because that was the name on the cloakroom ticket, and because the clerk would be grieved to find himself in an irregularity. The pen left a small blot at the end. The clerk sighed and pressed a piece of blotting paper over it, as if comforting a child for misbehavior. Il y a autre chose? The clerk asked, already regretting having asked. No, Le Maire said, and picked up the valise. It was heavier than its size allowed, which is how secrets are. He did not open it there. He stepped back into the current of the station and let it carry him to the doors, where the city pushed itself in and out in equal measure. Outside, under the canopy, a man was selling roasted chestnuts, the smell warm against the damp. Le Maire stood a little to the side, where he would not be jostled, and set the valise on his shoe for a moment, as if to feel its weight better. He had an impulse to take it home, and another to open it on the zinc of the café in the glare of an afternoon. That had not yet chosen to happen. He did neither. He lifted it again and turned his steps toward Rue Trudaine, the way one returns to a place one has left a thought behind. Aubin gave him the room key without comment. The corridor had a calmer light now, as if the walls had decided to think about other things. He set the valise on the bed where the blanket's nap showed the trace of it, and he stood a moment with his hand on the handle, the mended place under his palm like an old scar. The lock was simple, the lid lifted with a little breath of air, and the smell that comes from kept things, soap, wool, a faint old tobacco that had nothing to do with the cigarette in the wash-basin. On top lay a clean shirt, folded in the careful way of someone who has taught himself how. Under it a packet of socks bound with a strip of newspaper, a razor with a blade that would have pulled more than it cut. He touched the edge. It would have to do for a man who did not much shave. Beneath the shirt was a flat envelope made from the cover of a magazine, held with two nearly invisible stitches, grey thread again, neat, patient. He slipped the stitches with a fingernail. Inside a savings book from the Caisse d'Epargne, the last entries years old, and then 2 withdrawals in small amounts the week before. Folded paper with a line of figures that meant nothing by themselves, and a slip from a tailor, Atelier Girard, 43, Rue de Rochechouart. Retouche's costume, manche, taille, date, the day before yesterday. Paid, 15. He put the paper down on the blanket and felt with his fingers at the bottom seam of the valise the way one checks a pocket one has already checked. There was nothing more hidden. At the very bottom lay a spare set of laces and a small tin of polish. He opened it. The polish was black, ordinary, with the sour smell wax has when it has been opened and shut too often. No violette. He closed it again. He handled the shirt. It had been washed by hands and ironed by an iron that left a faint shine at the seams. He put things back, leaving the tailor's slip visible, as if it had put itself forward. He closed the valise and felt the weight of it lessen, not because it had changed, only because its silence had told him something about the man who had carried it. He took the slip and the cloakroom ticket from his wallet. looked at the numbers as if they might agree with each other, and became merely numbers again and went down. Aubin watched his face as a patient watches a doctor, without much hope and without belief in miracles. Lemaire showed him the slip with a finger on the address. Aubin nodded as if he had expected that street to appear somewhere. Rue de Rochechouart is the sort of street that tries to pretend it is all of Paris in a shorter line. Small shops, smells of glue and steam. A bar with a pinball machine that thinks it is serious. Number 43 had a window clouded with chalk lines drawn and rubbed away. A mannequin without arms and a waistcoat too narrow. A sign lettered by hand that had decided to be legible rather than elegant. A bell chimed from somewhere up a spiral of string when he pushed the door. Inside it was warm from the iron. A man stood with a tape around his neck and a piece of chalk that had flattened from use. He had the face of a man who has spent his life listening to cloth. He glanced up, glanced at the chalk mark on Lemaire's sleeve as if surprised to see his work where he had not done it, and then at the tailor's slip in Lemaire's hand. "Girard," he said by way of announcing the obvious, "if it is the trousers, we can take no more without changing the whole man." "The jacket," Lemaire said. He put the slip on the counter, turned so the chalk smear on his sleeve was visible almost by accident. "A man was here 2 days ago. Brown suit, too big. He did not speak much." Girard's mouth made a shape that stood for a memory being tested. "He spoke not at all," he said after a moment. "He put his hands like so." He placed his palms over his own ribs, pulling the cloth, and he looked at the mirror with resentment, as if the glass had betrayed an agreement. "I put pins. I marked." He lifted the chalk and tapped it against his finger. A small fog rose and settled. "He left before I had finished. That is why you have that," he added, with professional disapproval, nodding at the smear. "He brushed it as if it were dirt. People do not understand chalk." "He paid?" 15, Girard said, and I opened his pockets. They were sewn, as they are in some new suits so clients think they are still new. He watched me cut the threads as if it were a ceremony. "A deposit?" Girard reached under the counter without looking, and brought up a small tin where he kept coins for change. He poured them into his hand and fingered one. He held it between thumb and forefinger. "He gave me this by mistake, I think," he said. The 5-franc piece had a notch on the edge, the same bite a person takes to test bread when he doesn't trust the baker. Lemaire took it and turned it under the light. It had the indifferent expression all coins have. "He went where?" Lemaire asked. "Toward the boulevard," Girard said. "Not hurrying, like a man going to a waiting that is already tired of waiting." He looked back once at the window as if to remember what he would look like when I had finished something I had not yet begun. He was not a fanciful man. He said it because it had been there to be seen. Anyone came after asking about him. Girard rubbed his nose with the side of his hand to avoid dirtying it with chalk. "A woman with a scarf that was too red for her face," he said. "She asked if I had made a suit for a man you would not remark. I told her we make suits for such men every day." She smiled without amusement. She touched the cloth on the mannequin as if to see if it would answer her. Then she left. She smelled of cigarettes that have given up trying to be elegant. "Did she leave a name?" "Women who ask questions seldom do," Girard said without bitterness. "She had a little mark here." He touched the skin under his jaw. A scratch that had stopped bleeding not long before. Perhaps a dog. He looked at him steadily, inviting him to say whether he had understood what that meant. Lemaire did not help him. He put the notched coin on the counter and slid it back to the tailor. "Keep it," he said. "It belongs to your change tin." He left his jacket as it was. Girard nodded as if they had agreed about something practical. He lifted the jacket on the armless form and brushed a line that was no longer there. "He would have looked better," he said, but without vanity. "There are men the world owes that to. Outside again, the light had gone pale, not quite sun, the kind of day when people squint and complain of glare without justification. He put the tailor's slip in his pocket with the cloakroom ticket and felt the edge of them like small bones. The scarf the woman had worn sat in his mind like a flag someone had dropped. He stood a moment, watching a boy deliver a parcel from his bicycle, the string biting his fingers, and the line of numbers the waiter had given him, 43 and then nothing, ran together with the address in his pocket. He had the sense that if he let the day go where it meant to, someone would show themselves without being called, the way people step forward when a bus arrives and they no longer have to pretend they are not waiting. He did not go far. He let his feet carry him back toward the corner where one could see the hotel and the cafe and the narrow salon at once, as if the three had arranged themselves to make a triangle around a thing no one had named. The waiter nodded without surprise when he took the same table. He put a glass of water beside the place where the coffee cup had been and went away with the tact of someone who knows a man is not thirsty but needs something to put his hand near. Across the glass he saw her before he knew he had been waiting to. The scarf was too red for the day, and for her skin, which had a grey it did not deserve. She did what people do when they are pretending they are not watching a door. She paused, to look at her watch at a moment when there was no reason to. Then she turned, not to the hotel but to the salon. The bell made its little complaint. A second later, Miette's small indignation rose and fluttered, the sound of a tooth on glass. He waited a minute and crossed. The smell of hot metal and violette met him. The helmet dryer still hummed as if steady work calmed it. Madame Valette was at the mirror, smoothing a comb through a girl's hair who would leave pleased and not know why. The red scarf woman stood by the counter, turning a hairpin between her fingers as if it might tell her what to say. There was a thin scratch under her jaw, a mark made, he thought, by something that knew how to aim. Madame Valette did not pretend surprise. 2 o'clock, she said, glancing at the clock. You are punctual. That is unusual in a man. The other woman's eyes went to him and away. She had the habit of keeping her mouth ready for a cigarette, even when it was not there. She wore gloves that did not fit, the fingers too long, a trick some women use to keep their hands from telling on them. The scarf made a statement her face did not support. You were at the tailor, Lemaire said, as if to try the words on the room. You asked about a man you would not remark. She smiled with the corner of her mouth. We all ask that, don't we? The voice was ordinary. It had done its share of standing in lines and making itself heard at counters. She put the hairpin down with care, as if to leave no prints. I was passing. There is no law against passing. No, he said. He looked not at her but at the small pile of towels folded on the shelf. You have a dog, he said to Madame Valette. It is the size that likes to make itself known. Miette has opinions, she said. Her hand on the dog was half a warning, half affection. The animal wriggled and threw Lemaire a look that said it remembered him and did not share his beliefs. The woman with the scarf lifted her chin and the scratch showed. She does not like strangers, she said, and then with a little push of pride that surprised even her, nor do I. No one does, Lemaire said. He waited, the hum of the dryer, the soft slap of a brush on hair, the street noise coming through the door when someone jostled it. These took up the silence so no one had to fill it. You were in the corridor last night, he said at last, not making it a question. He did not look at her when he said it, and somehow that made it harder to deny. She opened her mouth and then did not. She touched the scratch, as if to remember how it had come there. I did not go up, she said, and then, because she heard how like someone else she sounded, added, I stood. The back door banged. I did not want to be mistaken for a thief. You know how a concierge's eye can be. I do, he said. I looked at the stairs, she went on, the words choosing themselves. He did not come down. Now she looked at Madame Valette, who looked at Miette. You, the woman said, you did not go up either. Madame Valette did not blush. "No," she said, "and if I had I would have come and told you after, because you would have asked and you do not take well to being refused." "You know one another," Le Maire said, "the same way one remarks that rain has begun." "Everyone knows everyone here," the red scarf woman said, tired. "And no one tells anyone anything." "Your name?" he asked, not pressing it. She hesitated and then let it go as if it were not much to give. "Jouve," she said. "Fernand. I am at the ribbon shop when I am not here and not at the window." She half smiled. "That is a lot of places for one person." "You asked at the tailor," he said. "Earlier you watched the hotel door and left. Before that you spoke to the porter with your chin high, because you are not the kind of woman who lowers it." "Why?" She drew breath to say something clever, and failed. "Because someone asked me to," she said in a voice that did not want to be heard. "Because it is not always kindness to go yourself. Sometimes it is more kind to send another, so that if the person does not come, you can say it was because the messenger was unlucky." "Who?" he said. She lifted a shoulder. "A woman who does not go out in the rain and does not like cafes. You will find her if you wish. She will say she knows nothing. She will not lie," she added, with a tone that said she did not approve of how truth behaved. "Poste restante," Le Maire said, watching neither of them. The words had the feel of something he had known and only mislaid. The cabman, the number that began 43 and then blurred. The little valise left at the consigne, because one does not take one's whole life to a waiting. Fernandez's mouth did that little movement people do when a remark touches the place they had not expected to be touched. "Thursdays, at 5, she said, almost impatient with herself. "He said the hour as if it were a church time." She saw her error and pushed her glove finger back up as if it were the glove that had slipped. "He won't come now," Madame Valette said quietly. She did not look at either of them when she said it. She looked at her hair that had taken the wave too readily and would need to be tamed down. "No," Le Maire agreed. He did not say what they all knew. He nodded to Miette, who accepted the attention, as her due, and to the two women who had arranged a man's life between them without agreeing about what it was. On his way out he passed his fingers along the glass of the door where the bell was tied. It chimed, announcing his absence as politely as it had his arrival. The afternoon had turned the color of paper that has sat in a drawer too long. He did not hurry. He put his hands in his pockets and let the walk take the time it wanted. The post office on Rue de Maubeuge has windows that make everyone look tired. Inside, at the counter marked Poste Restante, there is a way people stand that is different from any other line. They arrange themselves not to see each other because the letters coming to them do not have to explain themselves. He found the place beside the ficus that had been asked to live on dust and did not complain. The clerk behind the grill licked a finger before turning each page. A boy shifted from foot to foot and then decided to stand still because it looked more patient. The cabman from the cafe came in and stood near the door, his eyes doing that balancing act again between time and obligation. Le Maire waited. He had a way of making his waiting more solid than other people's. The clock over the rate chart ticked with effort. At 5, the clerk lifted a bundle of letters from a pigeonhole, placed them one by one on the shelf, and called out names with a voice that might have been calling prayers or fish. When he said, "Vachon," nothing happened but the air moving, in the room where the door opened, and the street let in the weather. Le Maire felt the failure like a glass put down without a coaster. He stepped forward, and did not step all the way. He could wait another minute, or he could say a name aloud. He did neither. He put his hand flat on the counter as if to feel how cool it was and let the clerk call again. The clerk cleared his throat and called the names again in the same order, as if obedience might summon someone the first recital had not. Vachon. The air shifted, nothing more. A girl took a letter with a blue border, and put it in her handbag without looking at the envelope, as if she could not bear to see the handwriting. The cabman from the cafe collected one, the sort of envelope that spends its life in the pocket of a jacket that smells faintly of cigarettes and rain, and went out with his shoulders up, as if the weather were inside him. The clerk began to slide the unclaimed letters back into their pigeonholes, bored in a patient way. Le Maire waited until the hand with the envelope marked Vachon touched the grill. He took his card from his pocket and set it on the counter without pushing it. "The addressee died yesterday," he said quietly, almost as if he were apologizing for the news. "I would like to note a hand, not open note." The clerk looked at the card as a man looks at a fish placed on his plate when he has not ordered. Fish. He frowned at the notion of a dead man whose letters still arrived. It offended some economy of his. He did not take the card. He looked past Le Maire toward the door as if the weather might instruct him. Then, with the slow caution of a man who sees no advantage in being clever, he turned the envelope face up under the grill so that it lay between them. His fingers stayed on it. The handwriting was careful and tired, the letters small and upright, the kind learned a long time ago at a wooden desk. The postmark had smudged at the edge, Mantes, the date of the day before, no return address. The corner of the flap had a pale touch of glue where someone had made certain. The paper was thin and common as bread. There was nothing to smell. "Ink is ink. Leave it," Le Maire said, as if to the clerk's fingers. He slid his card a little closer. "If anyone comes for it, call me." The clerk made a face that stood for all the small unfairnesses of his station and tucked the card under the blotter with the resignation of a man who knows he will trip over it later and be annoyed at himself. He put the envelope back with a gesture that tried to be careless and wasn't. The door opened on a small draught, and a woman who stood a second to let her eyes flatten to the room. She had a plain coat done up level with her throat, and a hat, with a narrow brim that had been brushed, if not recently, then always. Her gloves were the color of dust washed twice. She held an umbrella with the air of someone who treats objects as if they had feelings. The clerk's lips shaped bonsoir, and would have spoken it if he had a spare syllable. She came to the counter but a little to the side, not to interfere with anyone else's business. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice had that polished quiet certain women acquire from speaking in stairwells. "For Monsieur Vachon, is there something?" "Called twice," the clerk said, as if the fault of lateness could be divided. "You are—" "A friend," she said, and she did not push it further. Her hands made a movement as if to search for a paper and then gave up. She knew the rules and disliked them without drama. It must be he, the clerk recited, and then, because he was not stone, "Tomorrow, we hold 3 weeks." She nodded, as if he had offered her a seat, and she preferred to stand. Her eyes flicked to Le Maire and away, not a guilty glance, simply the habit of not inviting a stranger into a matter that was small enough to carry alone. The hat showed a worn patch at the back where a pin had held too often. As she turned, her sleeve brushed Le Maire's hand on the counter. The glove was smooth where it should have been rough, worn shiny with ironing. He let her go. He stepped aside and watched the umbrella bob among other umbrellas through the door's glass. When he went out, she was crossing the square in that careful way women have, who dislike puddles for the lies they tell about their depth. He followed at the kind of distance that feels like respect, even to the person who is being followed if she notices. She did not turn. She took Rue de Maubeuge a little uphill, then cut across to a narrower street where the names on doorbells are written in pencil. At number 17 she let herself in with a key that needed coaxing. On the window to the right of the door, an index card was pinned under the lace. Repassage, Soins pour chemises. The name below had been written over twice and ended in an E that came further down than it needed to. Through the stairwell, the smell of hot linen breathed out, cleaner than any perfume. Somewhere above, a flat iron clicked against its stand, Someone lifted it, set it down again. He did not ring. He stood a minute in the entrance where the grey daylight pooled, and thought of the shirt folded in Vachon's valise, ironed light along the seams, and of the grey thread that had mended the inside of the old shoes. The same patience. Not skillful, but done. He looked at his watch. It was not late and not early. It was the hour when the day makes its peace with being almost done. At home, the lamp was already on the sideboard. Madame le Maire had set the table and left the lid on the pot a little askew because stew breathes better that way. She looked over her glasses as he came in and did not ask. He washed his hands long under water that ran lukewarm and then chose to let it run a little longer. At the table he broke his bread with the blunt fingers of a man who has never learned to carve it properly with a knife. They ate in a quiet that was not silence. The window fogged slowly and cleared in the corners. The woman at the iron, he said, not meaning to say it as a subject, only because it was what the mouth had ready. She wears her gloves until she is at the door. Madame le Maire nodded without looking up. So she does not leave her hands on anything, she said. You can tell good ironing by the hands. If they are chapped, they cannot smooth collars. If they are too soft, they do not pull hard enough. The best as a rule are worn and clean. She tasted the stew and added salt, which he would not have done. Men polish their shoes when the apology cannot be said, she remarked, as if stirring had reminded her of something a woman she knew had once said. If it is permission they want, they bring flowers. If it is forgiveness, they bring clean shoes. It makes them feel in order. He sopped a piece of bread in the sauce and considered not the thought but the way she had come to it. He had both, he said, new shoes for what he was going to, old ones mended for what he had been. The old ones mended by a woman, she said, and wiped her fork on her bread as if it were natural. Men do not use grey thread because it is what is to hand. They wait to have money, and then they buy new things badly. The telephone rang with its polite insistence from the corridor. She did not move, he did. The voice at the other end was the clerk from the poste restante, made humble by the machine. Monsieur, pardon, a lady came back. After. She asked again for Monsieur Vachon. She did not insist. She left a note, perhaps, for him to see it if he came. I thought, you left your card? I thought. You did well, he said. Keep it in your drawer with the blotter. I will come in the morning. He hung up. In the kitchen, the stew waited as it had, the small bubble forming, and breaking under the lid that did not sit all the way down. He sat again. The bread had gone a little hard at the edge. He did not speak more. She did not ask what the man had done. She would not. She poured him a glass of wine and then pushed the salt a little closer, as if that were help one could give. When the meal was over, he put his coat back on without much need of it and went to the window. The rain had remembered itself. He took his hat and stood a second with it in his hand. She looked up, and in her glance there was the same economy as in the clerk's voice, the same permission that is not permission, but acceptance. He went out into the passage, closing the door behind him softly, so that the latch would not feel it had been forced. The stair smelled of soap and wet stone. He stood a little back from the door to 17, hearing the iron put down, lifted again, the small sigh of steam, the scrape of a chair leg. When the door opened, it was because she had decided, not because he had knocked. She held a pail with both, hands the way women do when they have learned to carry more than water. You were at the post, he said. He did not show his card. She had already seen it. I go there sometimes, she answered, as if it were her turn at a sentence they had been repeating all afternoon. For him, not always. When it is raining, usually not. She stepped aside. You will drip on the tiles, it doesn't matter. Come. The kitchen was clean in the way of places that are used all day. A folded stack of shirts lay by the window where the light is best. On the table, A spool of grey thread stood in a little chipped saucer as if on a plate. The iron hummed on the stand. When she moved it, its weight looked like nothing in her hand. On the chair, a brown cardigan had been laid straight, 2 stockings, drying over its back like parentheses. She set the pail under the sink and took off her gloves, laying them with care as if they were a letter to be posted later. Her hands were as Madame Le Maire had said, hands should be for ironing, worn clean, the nails square. "You left a note," he said. She wiped the edge of the sink with a cloth, though it did not need wiping. "I wrote 3 words," she said. "I put them in the drawer with the blotter and told him that if he came he was to be told. I did not put my name. He would have known." She glanced at him and away. "It wasn't much of a note. I am here. It is not a promise. It isn't anything, in fact." He waited. She picked up the iron and set it down again without using it. "I didn't go to the hotel," she went on. "I sent Clémence. She can stand at a counter and look as if she belongs there, and Fernand can ask questions as if she is only curious. For herself. I do not like to be seen waiting. It makes a noise in a stairwell." "You know him as Vachon," he said. She almost smiled. "I know him as René," she said, "and as a man who is stubborn about small things and gives way on the large ones. He thinks if he has clean shoes, people will forgive him. If he speaks, they will not." She looked at the iron as if it had asked something. "He is not mute," she said. "He is careful. The world punishes careful men." "The old shoes," he said. "The grey thread." "I had that spool," she said, nodding to the saucer. "It is good thread. It does not break when you pull hard. He wouldn't let me stitch the front, you know how men are, but the lining was going, and then the handle of his valise started to give. He said he would mend it with wire. I said, 'Wire says a thing about a man I did not want said.' The thread is quieter." He put his hand flat on the table, feeling a nick at the edge where a plate had been too heavy one day. "He bought new shoes," he said. "I told him to," she replied without pride. "Not for me, for himself, for the day. I told him not to come in his work jacket, but to go where men go when they want to look like men. He doesn't know those places. He went to a tailor and paid him to begin. That is like him. He does not finish well." Her mouth softened. He saved. 10-franc pieces, 5. He thought I didn't know. I iron for offices. The money is not the same each week. It is what you call uneven. You must keep a little back, for when the rain stays. "The letter from Monte," he said. She leaned against the sink. Water ticked in the pipe. "His brother has a cartage business there. René went after harvest to help, and they kept him. There was work. There is always work if you ask, and don't mind how you are spoken to. He came up on Thursday sometimes for the poste restante. It is a way to say you are not living where you are living." "You told him to use the post?" She shook her head. "He would not put my name in a book. He thinks that keeps me safe from what is in books." Her eyes went to the window where the glass held a slice of rain and the reflection of the shirts. "It is perhaps foolish," she said, "but sometimes foolish things are all people have." He did not rush her. The iron hummed quietly. "He said he would come yesterday," she said then, almost in the tone of a woman, remembering a recipe aloud. "I said I would not go down. I was not cruel. I said, 'If you are in the café, I will see you from here. You do not have to move. I will come if I can. If I do not, you will not be ashamed. You can sit and be just a man with a coffee.' He never liked that I could see him before he saw me." She turned the iron cord around her fingers, then unwound it. "I set the shirts aside at 7 and started a soup. I went to the window twice. The rain made the street look further away. I did not go down." She put a hand to her throat, almost surprised to find it there. "It is a very small thing not to go down," she said. "It can be the size of the world." He sat, Le Maire said, thinking of the chair. He had his shoes clean. She closed her eyes a moment. He would, she said. He did not tell her about the window open to the courtyard, about the cigarette that had not been smoked, about the gas ring turned off. Some things are not for kitchens. He did not suffer, he said. She nodded, as if he had told her the ironing was finished. Then, with a sudden impatience that was not with him, "He had done nothing," she said. "You know how sometimes men do a thing and it goes wrong and they are blamed and it goes wronger? He took money once, when he still worked at the yard. Not for himself, for a ticket for his mother. It was stupid and not wicked. They made a fuss. There are always men who like a fuss. After that he was a man with a thing that follows him. He does not argue. He goes around it, that is all." She looked at him in that calm way certain women have when they have chosen to be hurt only where they can bear it. "You will not write my name anywhere." "No," he said. "I will tell them a man died of his heart. They will shrug because men do." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "And after, I will go to the post office again, because the habit is there. And he will not come, and I will say nothing to anyone." She pressed the iron down lightly as if to reassure it that its work would go on. The spool of grey thread made a small shadow on the saucer. He looked around at the simple, exact life in the room, the place on the shelf where a jar had stood and now did not, the cup with a crack that had been turned, so the crack faced the wall. He thought of the tailor, the hairdresser, the ribbon shop, the porter who kept the rag, the waiter who remembered a notch in a coin. All of them had stood near without touching. That was sometimes how kindness looked, like keeping one's place. At the door she said almost formally, "Thank you for coming. It is better to talk to someone who doesn't tell you he understands." She added with a hesitation she hated, "He had nice hands, for a man." He inclined his head. In the stairwell, he put his palm on the curve of the banister where other hands had polished the wood without thinking. On the street, the rain was steady again, less like weather than like a background. He did not go to the hotel. He walked past it, glanced up at the blind window of room 14, and went on to the corner where the cafe's light made a square on the wet pavement. Inside, the waiter poured him a beer without asking, and then found something to do very far away. Le Maire let the glass sit. The liquid calmed itself. On the zinc, a little circle of wet collected under his thumb and then vanished. He thought about the note waiting at the post. 3 words in a drawer that was not a grave, only a place. He would go in the morning. Tonight there was nothing to fetch and nothing to put back. The city breathed under the rain as steady as an iron left warming for the next shirt. In the morning, the poste restante had the same tired light. The clerk, who had kept Le Maire's card under the blotter as if it might influence the ink, produced the small drawer with a sigh. On top lay the note the woman had left, one line on paper torn from the corner of a ledger. "Je suis là." No name, no hour. He let the paper touch his fingertip and then set it aside. "The letter from Montes," he said. The clerk looked at the grill as if it could absolve him, then at Le Maire's face, which would not require absolution. He turned the envelope with his fingers flat, so as not to bend it, and pushed it to the line. The postmark bled at one edge, the ink old-fashioned. Le Maire signed a name in the book that satisfied the page, and opened the envelope with the bone-handled opener that lived beside the stamps. The letter was short. The hand was small and square. It said, "René, you will come Thursday, as we said. The boss has work if you can keep steady hours. There is a room over the depot for the first month. Bring little. Leave the past where it lies. I will wait under. The clock like before. Armand." At the bottom there was a postscript. "If you want, bring the lady. She will find work ironing for Madame Tessier. She demands shirts that do not shine." He folded the paper once and slid it back into the envelope, as if that could send it untouched to where it had meant to arrive. The clerk watched his hands and then looked away. At number 17, the stair smelled of yesterday's steam iron and this morning's soap. She opened the door while he was still tapping his glove against his palm. He did not hold up the envelope like a thing recovered. He set it on the table next to the spool of grey thread. She read without haste and without stopping, as people do who are tired of not finishing. He would have gone, she said when she had folded the paper twice. She did not say whether she would have gone with him. She set the envelope under the saucer with the thread. Under the clock, she repeated to hear the words in the room. He had a fondness for clocks. He liked that they are honest. You had a signal, Lemaire said. The telephone. She admitted it with a tilt of her head. The seamstress. Upstairs is on the list 43 to 28. The numbers do not matter to you. He would let it ring once. I would go to the window. He did it 2 nights ago, and yesterday before 6. After, I did not look again. I had a pot on, and it was raining, she said, as if that were both nothing and everything. I thought he would come to the café whether I looked or not. There are moments when you cannot make your body obey your heart. You know that. He did not say whether he did. He opened the valise where the blanket made a mark and set it on the chair. He left this at the consigne, he said. There is a shirt, the savings book, the small things men carry when they mean to convince themselves they are not afraid, to leave. She put her hand on the handle where she had mended it and smoothed the stitches with her thumb. He liked that I had steady hands, she said. He said that once, as if it excused everything he did not say. She did not cry. She turned the packet of socks and laid it back. He took the old shoes in their brown paper from under his arm. When she unwrapped them, there was a little intake of breath at the sight of the grey thread, not surprise, only the ache of recognizing one's own work out of its place. I will keep these, she said. The new ones. They will throw those away. These I will put on the shelf and forget, and then see them when I am not expecting to and be foolish for a moment. That is fine. She looked at him. What will you write? That a man's heart stopped in a small room where the window opened onto a courtyard, he said. That he had paid his bill, that no one is to be troubled. She nodded. She had the look of someone to whom truth comes in pieces, and who takes them like tablets of medicine, not because she likes the taste, but because she believes in the prescription. He had a way of standing, she said suddenly, as if the recollection had risen, and she could not prevent it. With his hands flat on his thighs, as if he were listening to his own weight. I saw, he said. At the salon, Clémence Valette was fixing a girl's fringe with 2 pins held in her mouth. Lemaire set the square of flannel, washed and dried, on the counter. She took it without remark and pushed it under the till. I did not think you would bring it, she said finally, as if he had remembered some rule of the house she had not insisted on. Mietta nosed the edge of the rag and sneezed. He would have looked better in the jacket, Clémence added, almost to herself, but it would not have changed anything. At the tailor's, Gerard brushed a sleeve and didn't bother to find which way the nap lay. I will put the jacket in the window, he said, and then I will take it down. It does not belong to anyone any more. That is bad for business. Tati. The hotel, Aubin had already straightened the chair and closed the window. The room had returned to being a room. His brother telephoned, Aubin said, apologetic for having been useful without being asked. I told him there was nothing to do. He said, Ah. Lemaire put the key with the wooden tag on the hook and stood a second under the glass where names of rooms were written and rubbed away. Bourdon appeared again, his raincoat the same inadequate one. Ah, commissaire, he said. It will be 1 line then. We like 1 line. It leaves space for the next line. 1 will do, Lemaire said. He went at last to the café. The waiter saw him and set the beer down as if it were the point at which the day turned. Across the way the salon's curtain moved and fell still. The ribbon shop had its door open to let in more air than ribbons require. Fernand stood in it, the scarf put away, her throat showing the scratch now nearly gone. She lifted a hand, not as greeting but as a way of holding back the heat. "Under the clock," the waiter said, without knowing he was saying anything that mattered. He had a way of following the threads of other people's speech and finding the place where they knotted. "Under the clock," Lemaire agreed. He let the beer warm. Outside, the rain had given up on decision and simply was. He thought about the number 43 that had turned up like a coin in different pockets, on a boulevard, on a street, at a telephone, and meant nothing more than the human need to hold on to something simple when complicated things begin. He thought of the shoes on the shelf and the note in the drawer at the post, a sentence that had found no addressee. He did not feel he had solved anything. He had stood near, and sometimes that was an answer. When he rose, he left 2 coins and did not look to see if either had a notch. He walked as far as the corner and then stood a moment under the awning with his hands in his pockets, listening to the city talk to itself in the rain. A bus pulled up. People got off and went nowhere quickly. On the second floor of number 17, a shirt was hung to dry, square and exact, its seams faintly shiny where the iron had insisted. He lifted his collar against the weather and went home, to the lamp on the sideboard, and the plate his wife would have kept warm under a folded towel, thinking not about death, but about the way people make places for each other in a world that often forgets to.